The golden light from the crystal chandeliers spilled across the polished floors of Salvetti's, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to follow Maeve like the past she was trying to outrun. She adjusted the knot of her black tie, her fingers cold and steady, a habit learned from a lifetime of hiding in plain sight. At 21, Maeve had mastered the art of being a ghost in a room full of monsters. She moved through the elite Chicago restaurant with a rehearsed, empty smile, grateful for a job that paid for her linguistics textbooks and kept her far away from the blood-soaked legacy of the O'Malley name. "Table 4 needs a clear down, and watch the attitude," the head waitress hissed, moving past Maeve without a second glance. "The Corsettis are in a foul mood tonight, and the last thing we need is a scene." Maeve nodded, her heart maintaining a slow, rhythmic beat that didn't match the sudden chill in the air. Alessio Corsetti. The name alone was enough to make the city's toughest enforcers lower their voices. She had been serving his section for weeks, always careful to remain nothing more than a blurred figure in the background, just another piece of the expensive furniture. The dining room hummed with the hushed tones of men who traded in lives and territories, people who had never known the desperate cold of a life spent on the run. "Excuse me." The voice was like low-frequency thunder, vibrating in Maeve's chest before she even turned around. She found herself looking up at Alessio Corsetti. He was a mountain of tailored black wool and dark, slicked-back hair, his presence so dominant it seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room. A black cursive tattoo climbed his neck, a sharp contrast to the flawless white of his unbuttoned collar. His eyes, dark and predatory, locked onto hers with a sudden, sharp focus that made her breath hitch. "Your mother's water, sir?" Maeve asked, her voice a soft, practiced shield. She tried to ignore the glint of his gold chain and the way his gaze seemed to be peeling back her layers, searching for the O'Malley hiding beneath the waitress's vest. "Not yet," Alessio replied, his voice dropping into a dangerous murmur. He stepped aside, revealing the elegant elderly woman seated behind him. "My mother has been trying to speak to you for 5 minutes. It seems no one in this establishment understands her." Maeve looked at Serafina Corsetti. The older woman was dressed in cream silk, her gray hair pinned back neatly, but her eyes were wide with a quiet, lonely frustration as her hands moved in small, rapid gestures. Without thinking, the linguistics student in Maeve took over. She set her tray down on a nearby stand and stepped toward the table. Her hands rose, moving with a fluid, graceful precision that belonged to a world far away from food service. "Good evening," Maeve signed, her movements a rare, ancient dialect of Italian Sign Language. "I am so sorry for the delay. How can I make your evening perfect?" Serafina froze. Her face transformed, a look of pure, shocked wonder lighting up her features as she realized someone finally knew her language. Behind her, Alessio Corsetti went perfectly still, his eyes narrowing as he watched the invisible waitress command the silence of the room. Maeve's hands were still moving in the air, finishing her sentence to Serafina, when she felt Alessio's shadow fall over her. It was heavy and cold, like a mountain blocking out the sun. The restaurant was quiet now. The other waiters had stopped moving, and the rich patrons were staring. Maeve lowered her hands, her heart thumping against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had broken the first rule of being a ghost. Never let them see who you really are. Serafina reached out and patted Maeve's hand, her eyes shining with joy. She signed something quickly, telling her son that this girl was a gift. But Alessio didn't look happy. He leaned down, his face coming so close to Maeve's that she could smell his expensive cologne and the faint scent of rain. "That is a very rare way of signing," Alessio whispered. His voice was like a low growl that only she could hear. "My mother says it comes from a small village in Italy, a village that has deep ties to the O'Malley family in Boston." Maeve tried to keep her face still. "I don't know what you mean, sir. I just like languages." Alessio narrowed his eyes. He reached out and gripped the edge of the table, his tattooed knuckles turning white. "You are a bad liar, Lily. Or should I say, Maeve? You try to talk like a Chicago local, but your R sounds slip. You sound like someone who grew up in a mansion on the East Coast, not someone who serves wine for a living." Maeve felt the blood drain from her face. She thought she had been so careful. She had changed her hair, her name, and her clothes. She had worked so hard to bury the girl who was supposed to marry a man she hated. "You've been watching me," she accused, her voice shaking just a little. "I watch everything that moves in my city," Alessio replied. He stepped even closer, his gold chain clinking softly. "I knew you were hiding something the moment you walked past my table last month. You don't walk like a waitress. You walk like a girl who was born to lead. And tonight, your kindness to my mother just confirmed it." He looked at her with a mix of curiosity and something else. Something that looked like respect. But the danger was still there. He was a boss who lived in a world of secrets, and he had just found her biggest one. "The O'Malley name carries a lot of weight," Alessio said, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "And right now, that weight is about to crush you. We need to talk, Maeve. Not as a boss and a waitress, but as two people who know that the shadows are closing in." Alessio didn't wait for her to answer. He reached into the inner pocket of his black suit jacket and pulled out a thin, folded piece of paper. He laid it flat on the white tablecloth right next to Serafina's hand. The older woman looked at the paper and then back at Maeve with a face full of sadness. Maeve leaned forward, her eyes scanning the lines of names written in neat, cold ink. At the very top of the list was her father's name, Cormac O'Malley. Below it were her brothers, Ronan and Finn. But it was the name at the bottom of the page that made Maeve feel like she had been punched in the stomach. The list was signed with a symbol she knew by heart, a small, coiled snake. "This is a hit list, Maeve," Alessio said, his voice dropping even lower. "It wasn't made by my people. It was made by one of your own. Rowan Flanagan has been selling out your family for months." Maeve shook her head, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "No, that's impossible. Rowan grew up with my father. He's like an uncle to my brothers. He's the most loyal man we have." Alessio leaned over the table, his gold chain swaying. "Loyalty is just a word people use until the price is high enough. Flanagan has been making deals with the Russian gangs behind your father's back. He wants the O'Malley throne, and he's willing to step over the bodies of your family to get it." He tapped a finger on the paper, pointing to a set of dates and numbers next to her brothers' names. "He's been tracking Ronan's shipments and Finn's schedule at school. He's waiting for the right moment to strike. If you don't help me stop him, your brothers won't live to see the end of the week." Maeve looked at the slicked-back hair and the tattoos on Alessio's hands. He was her family's enemy, a man she was supposed to hate. But as she looked into his dark eyes, she didn't see a lie. She saw the truth that she had been running from for 2 years. The world she left behind was rotting from the inside. "Why are you telling me this?" Maeve whispered, her fingers trembling as she touched the paper. "Why would a Corsetti care if the O'Malleys fall?" "Because my mother likes you," Alessio said, glancing at Serafina, who was watching them with a worried frown. "And because I don't like snakes, I would rather fight a lion like your father than a coward like Flanagan. If he takes over, this city will burn, and my people will be caught in the fire too." He slid the paper toward her. "The snake is in the grass, Maeve, and he's already moving." The air in the restaurant grew even colder as the front doors swung open. Maeve didn't have to look up to know who had arrived. She could feel a heavy, familiar dread crawling up her spine. A man with a thick neck and a deep scar above his eye stepped into the light. It was Colm Dwyer, her father's most ruthless enforcer. He was the man who handled problems, and Maeve knew that tonight, she was the problem. Colm stood by the bar, his eyes scanning the room like a hungry wolf. He held a small photo in his hand, showing it to the bartender. Maeve gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. If Colm saw her, her life as a simple waitress would be over in a heartbeat. He wouldn't just take her home, he would make sure she never had the chance to run again. Alessio saw the terror in her eyes. He didn't panic. He stayed calm, his dark eyes shifting toward the back of the building. He reached out and caught Maeve's wrist, his grip firm but not mean. "Don't look at him," Alessio whispered, his voice steady. "If you look, he will feel it. Keep your head down." Serafina noticed the danger too. She quickly stood up and moved in front of Maeve, using her elegant cream blouse and wide stance to block Colm's view. She signed a quick message to Maeve. "Go now. My son will keep you safe." Through the kitchen, Alessio commanded, leaning close to Maeve's ear. There is a service hall that leads to the building next door. My driver, Carlo, is waiting at the end with a black SUV. He knows what to do. But my things, my books, Maeve started to say, her voice shaking. They are just things, Alessio interrupted. Right now, your life is the only thing that matters. Move. Maeve didn't wait any longer. She turned and hurried toward the swinging silver doors of the kitchen. She could hear the heavy thud of Colm's boots on the marble floor behind her, moving closer to the dining area. Her heart was hammering so loud it felt like it was echoing off the walls. As she pushed through the kitchen, the smell of garlic and hot oil filled her nose. The other cooks stared at her, but she didn't stop. She ran down the narrow, dim hallway, her black tie flapping over her shoulder. Just as she reached the heavy metal door at the back, she heard a shout from the restaurant. Colm had found her station. She burst through the exit and into the cool night air. A large black SUV was idling in the shadows of the alley, its headlights off. The door swung open, and a man named Carlo waved her in. "Hurry, Miss O'Malley," he said. Maeve jumped inside and slammed the door. As the car sped away into the fog, she looked back through the dark window. She saw the silhouette of Alessio standing in the doorway, his gold chain catching the light one last time. He had helped his enemy's daughter vanish into the night, and Maeve knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The SUV stopped at a large stone house hidden deep in the woods, far away from the bright lights and noisy streets of Chicago. The air smelled like pine trees and fresh rain. Carlo led Maeve inside, where the rooms were filled with soft carpets and warm golden lamps. It was a safe house, but it didn't feel like a prison. It felt like a home. Serafina was already there, sitting by a crackling fireplace with 2 cups of steaming tea on a small wooden table. Serafina looked up and smiled, her kind eyes crinkling at the corners. She patted the seat next to her, inviting Maeve to sit. For a long time, the only sound was the popping of the wood in the fire. Maeve felt the tension in her shoulders finally start to melt away. She looked at the older woman, who was moving her hands in slow, beautiful motions. "You are safe here," Serafina signed. "My son would never let the snakes enter this house. This is our sanctuary." Maeve signed back, her fingers moving a bit faster as her nerves calmed down. "Thank you for helping me. I don't understand why Alessio is doing this. My family and yours have been enemies for generations. The old rules say we should be fighting, not sharing tea." Serafina's expression turned serious, and a shadow of old pain passed over her face. She began to tell a story through her signs, explaining that the Corsetti family had seen too much blood because of those old rules. She explained that Alessio's father had been a cruel man who believed that power was the only thing that mattered. He had forced Alessio to do terrible things to prove he was tough, just like Maeve's father had tried to force her into a marriage she didn't want. "Alessio hates the old rules because they took his childhood," Serafina signed, her hands moving with deep emotion. "He watched his friends die for territory that didn't matter. He saw me live in silence and fear for years. When he took over, he vowed to change things. He wants a world where loyalty is earned, not forced by fear." Maeve watched the firelight dance in Serafina's silver hair. She realized that she and Alessio were more alike than she had ever imagined. They were both children of a violent world, trying to find a way out of the shadows. Alessio wasn't helping her just to be nice. He was helping her because he knew what it felt like to be a pawn in someone else's game. "He sees himself in you," Serafina added, her eyes locking onto Maeve's. "A person who is brave enough to walk away from a crown to find their own voice." Maeve looked down at her tea, feeling a strange new respect for the man with the black tattoo. She had spent years running away from her past, but in this quiet sanctuary, she began to realize that she might have to stop running. To save her brothers, she would have to use the very things she tried to forget. But for the first time, she wouldn't be doing it alone. She had the support of a mother who understood silence and a boss who wanted to break the cycle of hate. The heavy oak door of the study swung open, and Alessio stepped inside. He had traded his expensive blazer for a simple black shirt, but the gold chain around his neck still glowed in the dim light. He looked tired, his dark hair slightly messy for the first time since Maeve had met him. In his large, tattooed hands, he carried a sleek silver laptop. He set it down on the table between Maeve and Serafina, the screen glowing blue in the quiet room. "The snakes have been busy while you were hiding, Maeve," Alessio said. His voice was steady, but there was a hard edge to it that made the air feel heavy. He turned the laptop toward her and began to scroll through folders filled with hundreds of files. Maeve leaned in, her breath hitching, as she saw bank records, secret emails, and photos taken from the shadows. There were pictures of Rowan Flanagan, meeting with men in dark coats, men Maeve recognized as leaders of the Russian syndicates. They were the very people her father had spent years fighting to keep out of their territory. "Look at the dates," Alessio commanded, pointing to a spreadsheet. "Flanagan wasn't just talking to them. He was selling them the codes to your father's warehouses. He was telling them exactly when the police would be looking the other way." Maeve felt a cold shiver run down her spine. "He's been planning this for a long time," she whispered. She clicked on a file labeled "The Final Step" and felt her heart drop. It was a digital map of the city's docks, with a specific warehouse circled in red. Attached to it was a message from Flanagan to the Russians. It said that the O'Malley bloodline would end on Friday night. "He's going to lead my father and brothers into a trap," Maeve said, her eyes filling with tears of anger. "He's going to make them think they are going to a peace meeting, but he's already planned the funeral." Alessio nodded, his face a mask of cold fury. "He thinks he can blame the attack on my family. He wants to start a war between the O'Malleys and the Corsettis, so he can sit on the throne while we destroy each other. He thinks he's the smartest man in Chicago." Serafina reached out and placed a gentle hand on Maeve's shoulder. She signed quickly, her eyes fierce. "A man who betrays his own blood is a man with no soul. We cannot let him win." Maeve looked at the laptop, then up at Alessio. For 2 years, she had tried to forget the violent language of her past. She had wanted to be a student, a waitress, a normal girl, but the digital evidence in front of her proved that the world she ran from was coming for her anyway. If she didn't act now, the brothers she loved would be nothing more than names on a gravestone. "I have seen enough," Maeve said, her voice growing stronger. "Rowan Flanagan thinks I'm just a girl who ran away. He thinks I'm weak, but I know his secrets as well as he knows mine." Alessio closed the laptop with a sharp click. "Then it is time to stop being a ghost, Maeve. The smoking gun is in our hands. Now, we just have to decide who pulls the trigger." The silence in the study felt heavy as Maeve stared at the dark laptop screen. For 2 years, she had been a ghost, hiding in classrooms and small apartments, hoping that if she stayed quiet enough, her past would leave her alone. But looking at the digital evidence of Flanagan's plan, she realized that silence was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. Her brothers, Finn and Ronan, were walking into a graveyard, and she was the only one who could pull them back from the edge. "I have to go back," Maeve whispered. The words felt like stones in her mouth, but as she said them, the fear that had been chasing her for years finally stopped. Alessio leaned against the desk, his dark eyes watching her closely. "You know what happens if you walk into that warehouse, Maeve. Your father hasn't forgiven you for leaving. To him, you are a traitor who turned her back on the family. He might not even let you speak before the guns are drawn." "I don't care," Maeve said, standing up straight. She reached back and pulled her dark hair into a tight, neat bun, just like she did before a shift at the restaurant. But this time, she wasn't preparing to serve wine. She was preparing for war. "Finn is only 19. He shouldn't pay for my father's pride or Flanagan's greed. If my father wants to hate me, let him. But I won't let him die thinking his best friend is a hero." Serafina walked over and took Maeve's hands in hers. She signed with a slow, steady grace. "A person who runs is always looking back. A person who stands still can finally see the way forward. You are not the girl who fled anymore. You are the woman who is coming home to save it." Maeve looked at the older woman and felt a surge of courage. She turned to Alessio, who was already reaching for his phone to call his men. "I need to get into that warehouse before the meeting starts. If I can talk to my father alone, I can show him the truth. But I need you to hold back the Russians. If they see a Corsetti car, they will start shooting, and the trap will spring early. I will handle the Russians. Alessio promised. He walked over to her, his dominant presence filling the space between them. For a second, he didn't look like a mafia boss. He looked like a man who understood exactly what it felt like to have your family's life hanging by a thread. He reached into his pocket and handed her a small, untraceable phone. If things go wrong, press the side button. My men will be in the shadows. We won't let you fall, Maeve. Maeve took the phone and tucked it away. She looked at her reflection in the dark window. The waitress named Lily was gone. The scared girl from Boston was gone. She was an O'Malley, and it was time to act like one. No more running, she said, her voice firm and clear. She turned toward the door, ready to face the man she had feared her whole life to save the family she had never stopped loving. The dragon and the ghost were stepping out of the sanctuary and into the fire. The Chicago docks were cold and smelled like salty water and old metal. A thick fog rolled off the lake, hiding the giant cranes that looked like sleeping monsters in the dark. In the middle of this gray world sat Warehouse 14. It was a place where the city's two biggest families had met for years to settle their problems. Tonight, it was supposed to be a place of peace, but the air felt heavy, like a storm was about to break. Maeve crouched behind a stack of wooden crates near the side entrance. Her heart was beating so hard, she thought it might crack her ribs. Through a dusty window, she could see the inside of the giant room. It was lit by a few dim bulbs that swung from the ceiling, casting long, dancing shadows on the concrete floor. At the center of the warehouse stood a metal table. Her father, Cormac O'Malley, sat on one side. He looked older than Maeve remembered. His hair was almost completely white, and he moved with a slight stiffness, but his eyes were still as sharp as broken glass. Next to him were Ronan and Finn. Seeing her younger brothers made Maeve's throat tighten. Finn was looking around nervously, his hand resting near his belt, while Ronan stood as still as a statue. Facing them was Rowan Flanagan. He was pouring whiskey into 2 glasses, a friendly smile on his face that made Maeve feel sick. He looked like the same uncle who used to bring her candy when she was little. He was talking in a low, warm voice about the good old days and why they needed to stick together against the Italians. To loyalty, Flanagan said, lifting his glass. His voice was smooth and kind. To the families that built this city and the friends who never walk away. Maeve saw her father reach for his glass. She knew that Alessio's men were outside, holding back the Russians who were waiting for Flanagan's signal to strike. But the real danger wasn't outside yet. It was in that glass. According to the files on the laptop, Flanagan didn't want a fair fight. He wanted a quick end to the O'Malley name so he could take everything for himself. The warehouse was perfectly still. Not a single bird chirped, and even the sound of the waves seemed to stop. It was the neutral ground, a place where no one was supposed to draw a gun. But Maeve knew the rules had been broken a long time ago. She took a deep breath, clutching the flash drive in her hand. She couldn't wait any longer. If her father took a sip of that drink, the trap would snap shut, and she would lose her family forever. She stepped out from behind the crates and pushed the heavy metal door open. The rusted hinges let out a long, high scream that echoed through the empty space. Every head at the table snapped toward her. "Don't drink that, da!" Maeve shouted, her voice ringing out like a bell in the silent warehouse. The ghost had finally stepped out of the shadows, and the meeting on the neutral ground was about to turn into a fight for survival. The metal door hit the wall with a loud bang, and the sound bounced off the high ceiling of the warehouse. For a second, no one moved. Her father, Cormac, held the glass just an inch from his lips, his hand frozen in the air. He stared at Maeve as if he were seeing a ghost. Finn's jaw dropped, and Ronan stepped forward, his eyes wide with shock. "Maeve?" her father whispered, his voice cracking. "What are you doing here?" Rowan Flanagan's face turned a strange, sickly shade of gray. His friendly smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure hatred. "She's a traitor, Patrick," Flanagan shouted, standing up so fast his chair fell over. "She's been hiding with the Corsettis. She's here to finish us off. Don't listen to her." Maeve didn't stop. She ran toward the table, her boots thudding on the concrete. Just as her father started to tilt the glass back, she reached out and slapped it from his hand. The glass shattered on the floor, splashing the amber liquid across the shoes of the men who had once been brothers. "Look at the floor, Maeve pointed at the liquid. Where the drink touched the metal leg of the table, it began to fizz and bubble with a tiny hissing sound. "It's not whiskey, it's a poisoned chalice. He didn't want you to agree with him. He wanted you to die." Cormac looked down at the bubbling mess on the floor, then up at his oldest friend. His face grew hard, like a mountain made of cold stone. "Rowan?" Flanagan reached for the gun at his belt, but Ronan was faster, pointing his own weapon at Flanagan's chest. The other guards in the room drew their guns, and suddenly the neutral ground felt like a powder keg ready to explode. "I have proof," Maeve shouted over the noise. She pulled out the silver laptop Alessio had given her and slammed it onto the metal table. With shaking fingers, she pressed play on a video file. The warehouse filled with the sound of Flanagan's own voice. The speakers played a recording of him talking to the Russian gangs, laughing about how he would lead the O'Malleys to the docks and clean up the mess once they were dead. He talked about how the Corsettis would take the blame and how he would finally be the one in charge. Cormac listened to the betrayal in silence. The lines in his face seemed to grow deeper with every word. He looked at the laptop, then at his daughter, and finally at the man who had been his right hand for 30 years. The truth was out in the light, and there was no way for the snake to hide anymore. "You sold my sons to the Russians for a throne," Cormac said. His voice was very quiet, which was much scarier than a scream. Flanagan looked around the room, realizing he was trapped. Outside, the sound of tires screeching told him his Russian allies wouldn't be coming to save him. Alessio had kept his promise. Maeve stood her ground, her head held high. She wasn't a waitress or a ghost anymore. She was an O'Malley, and she had just saved her family from the dark. The warehouse fell silent as the weight of the betrayal sank in. Rowan Flanagan didn't say a word as my father's guards stepped forward to lead him away into the dark. He had lost his power, his friends, and his future in a single night. My father, Cormac, stood still for a long time, looking at the empty space where his oldest friend had just been. He looked tired, not just sleepy, but tired in his soul. He turned to me and, for the first time in 2 years, he didn't look at me with anger. He reached out and placed a heavy hand on my shoulder, his eyes watery and soft. "You saved us, Maeve," he whispered. "I was too blind to see the snake, but you stayed sharp. I think I've been in this game too long." A week later, the news hit the streets of Chicago like a lightning bolt. Cormac O'Malley was stepping down. He was retiring to the Green Hills of Ireland, leaving the family business to Ronan and Finn. But the biggest surprise wasn't the retirement, it was the peace. Under the warm spring sun, a meeting took place that the city would talk about for decades. I stood on the stone patio of the Corsetti estate, the smell of blooming roses filling the air. To my left stood my brothers, looking proud and strong. To my right stood Alessio, his black suit sharp and his gold chain sparkling. Between us sat a simple wooden table with a new contract, one that didn't talk about territories or war, but about cooperation and respect. Serafina sat nearby, watching us with a bright smile. She signed to me, her hands moving like dancing birds. "The old rules are buried. Now we speak a language that everyone can understand." Alessio picked up a silver pen and signed his name in bold, dark ink. Then he handed the pen to Ronan. When the deal was done, Alessio turned to me. The scary dragon from the restaurant was gone. In his place was a man who had helped me find my way home. He didn't say anything, but he reached out and took my hand. His grip was warm and steady, a silent promise that I would never have to be a ghost again. Chicago was changing. The dark shadows of the past were fading, replaced by a new light. I wasn't just a waitress named Lily or a runaway named Maeve. I was a bridge between two worlds. As I looked out over the city with Alessio by my side, I knew that our story was just beginning. We had turned enemies into allies and silence into a song. The new Chicago was finally here, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't running. I was exactly where I was meant to be,